actually, women are allowed to be masculine. We don't have to name your ambition as feminine so that it's okay for you to be ambitious. You can be a feminine woman and you can be ambitious.
All right, everyone, welcome. Welcome to Climbed. Today, I have a really special guest with us. Her name is Kendra Cunov. And Kendra, I know you, well, I don't know you, but I know of you for quite some time. And I wanted to have a discussion with you. And I actually know you through John Wineland, who I've also had on this podcast. And so to me, you almost represent the feminine side of that partnership, so to say. And I'm actually curious what's happening there now, but we'll get into that in a second. So welcome, Kendra. I'm super excited to have you here today with me.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to be here.
Yay. So we usually start with some fun questions. So let me ask you like kind of an icebreaker. Kendra, name one thing that you cannot live without.
Whole milk in my tea.
Like full on dairy whole milk?
Oh, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, full cream. If it can be cream at the top, like I'm all for it. Sometimes I'll even put half and half in my tea. Like I really want to go for it. Yeah. I don't know if I can't live without it, but I do get very cranky if I don't have milk for my tea.
Okay. Wow, that's pretty cool. Okay. If you had a tattoo, where and what would it be? And if you have some already, then maybe you tell us about that. And then what's your next one? Because I know if you have one, then it's like the gates are open and you probably can never stop.
Well, it is so interesting. So I have no tattoos, which I find to be fairly rare. Like that's actually less common among the people that I tend to associate with. And, but I've been actively looking to partner with a tattoo artist for probably the last couple of years. And it's specifically around, I don't know exactly, but one has to do with a hawk, like a red-tailed hawk, which is local to the area that I live in Northern California. And one would be a barn owl, also local to this area. And I have sort of personal connections with both of these birds. And I don't know exactly, but I often get the sense that one goes in this front, like top of my chest, wing spread, and one goes in the back, like all the way across my shoulders.
Big one. Whoa.
And with like wide open wings, and probably wrapping around my shoulders, the wings, kind of the feathers coming down, which is part of the reason it hasn't happened, because I have the sense this is quite a commitment of time and body, if you will.
Yeah. Why that? Why the hawk and the owl?
I have always really related to the hawk. And there's something about the often people will say bird's eye view, and I actually always say hawk's eye view. There's a certain kind of height and there's a way of looking and seeing. And just a connection, I think, that hawks in particular have to the heavens. And then the owl is interesting because I didn't relate, but actually I was driving back from a retreat with one of my teachers down in Southern California. And I was driving up the highway and I saw a bird on the side of the road that had been hit. Obviously, it was killed. And the feather kind of rose up as the cars were going by, like it lifted up like this. And I saw this flash of color and I thought, that's a red-tailed hawk. And I pull a Yui on the highway and go back around and I pull off to the side of the road and I walk up to this bird and it's a barn owl. And it was the barn owl's wings, it's a slightly different color, but there's that similar reddish brown. And that's the color that I had seen. And I see this owl and I immediately fall on my knees and I start weeping. And I didn't even really know what was happening. I just felt so, impacted by like an owl having been hit by a car on the side of the highway. And I ended up, because I had been coming from this retreat, I had a pillow in the back of my car. So I took the pillowcase out and I picked this owl up. I didn't know what to do. And so I put it in the pillowcase and I put it in my car. And then I called my teacher but I had to get home. So I was sort of doing all of this without exactly thinking. Like there's just some impulse. And I said, what do I do? What do I do? And he says, he's very practical as well as being spiritual. And he's like, well, you should bury it. And I was like, oh, of course. Like, I don't know, like, why was I even confused here? But I was already driving and I had to get back to my kids. And so I ended up having this conversation with this owl about like, I'm so sorry, I am going to bury you, but it's going to be back at my home. And anyway, I ended up having this long relationship with this owl.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, that tattoo is a commitment. I don't think if I have the balls.
The
That's
ovaries.
ovaries, yeah. That's a good. I don't think if I have the ovaries to do like because I have 3, but they're small. Like one of them actually is birds here on my left wrist.
That's beautiful.
And they are, it goes like from black to kind of green and fading. I did this a few years ago, and anyways, that's such a powerful representation for me of freedom and stuff. But to do a big one like a cross, I'm right now toying with the idea to do like a half sleeve on my shoulder, and that's already like such a big commitment. Well, simply because if you wear something, especially in the summer, people can see it. While probably on the chest and the back, it's mostly like when you're wearing a bathing suit. But actually, like in the summer, if you do it here,
or a tank top, or
that's huge. So wow, that's a big commitment. All right, thanks
Maybe
for
we'll
sharing
check in
that
in
with
a year
us
and see where that goes.
yeah. And one last question I wanted to ask you to break the ice. I see in all the videos that you're doing, like the behind you is and for those of you who are listening to our podcast, in the background, there's a piece of, I don't know how you call it. Like
it's
there's
actually
a material.
quilt.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's a quilt and it's a circle. Okay. You should describe it for us. And then there's colors and what does it mean?
Yeah, so it's a rainbow. It starts at the outside, right, with the dark blue, and it goes into lighter blue, green. And so at the very center is red, which many people don't always see. What almost nobody sees is the back, which actually, so this was made for me by someone who is a friend and also a client, has been a client and a student. And one of the spaces that I hold is called the Collective. And it's a global web of women devoted to embodied wholeness. And it was the web. It was actually a vision of seeing a web that had me create that program. And so on the back, she quilted this whole, it's these tiny little pieces of fabric. They're all folded and they're also, this is, anybody who knows quilting that sees this, they say, this is an act of love. And I said, yes, I know. I feel like this woman, she puts so much love into it. But on the back, the stitching is actually a web. And then she made this spider out of beads to go on it. And so no, it's actually what's behind there. It's on the back.
Wow.
And so almost nobody ever sees that, but it's actually sort of meant, it's this, behind the scenes transmission of what it is to hold the web.
That is so beautiful. Wow. That's such a gift. Such a gift.
Yeah.
Amazing. Okay. Thank you. All right. So now it's the time, Kendra, to introduce yourself. So tell us who you are and what you do.
Oh my goodness. I always get a little bit tongue-tied. I would say that I work with people in the realm of embodied wholeness. So I coach and I teach. I run large group programs. I work with people individually. I work with couples. Haven't been doing as much in person lately, but I do work with people in person as well. And I like to say that I work with embodied wholeness because to me, that's the unique path for any individual of where does the expression or the full embodiment of our wholeness live. So I would say that I believe that we are always already whole. It's not about like, oh, let's patch some things together and let's fix them and let's fill this in so that you become whole, but that we're not always in touch with or expressing our full wholeness as human beings with each other and in our work, with our families, in sexual relationships. And so my work is really towards, what is the path to wholeness?
And how would you explain wholeness, like especially embodied wholeness, right? Like what is the experience of that? How does someone experience or how does you experience wholeness? Like what does that mean?
I would say two things. One is, in one sense, I like to say we're all of it. So any place that we think I am this or I'm not that, I just think that's not true, right? So there's always an avenue of, oh, that's a place to lean into. Like there is wholeness there. We are all of it. And so one sense of that is that feeling, or it's almost like an agility, right? A feeling of agility in, oh, I have everything at my disposal. And if I was an artist, I would have all of the colors or all of the different materials. And if I was creating something, I'd be like, oh, this calls for this calls for this. And there wouldn't be any, oh, wait, is it okay to use that color? Or I'm only a
Mm.
painter. I'm not allowed to use uh, pencils, colored pencils or crayons, or well, stickers are for children. Or I would just be like, oh, that's what's called for, right? And so I'm making my art, and I have that capacity. And part of the way that I think that this is the way that I experience it, and that I see other people experiencing it, is really a sense of belonging. Like when we know that we have that kind of um, access to all of ourselves, that the sense is, oh, I belong wherever I am. I belong in my own body. I belong on this spot on earth that I actually am inhabiting. And I belong in any room I walk into. I can choose or not choose to go there, but I actually belong wherever I am.
Mm. Mm. Yeah, that's beautiful in the way you describe it, and it also explains it in a bit of a different way what I do with women in my work, because I
Mm,
also do embodiment work with women, which helps them, get into their feminine, relax, let go, and also attract what they want in terms of men. But this whole aspect of embodiment, how I'm doing it with them through embodiment
mm,
practices, is actually what you said, giving them permission to be, or to be in relationship, to inhabit and to feel in those spaces that are theirs and that are human, and we're all feeling them. So it's like, I understand this metaphor of color, because it's like, well, black, nobody wants to paint black because it's dark
yeah.
and negative and whatever. Or there's like, you know it- it's really interesting because, well, you talk about this metaphor of color or paint, or you actually not only talk about the paint, but you bring in different textures, like there's pencils and there's
Mm,
stickers, and
yeah.
and the pencils are like the different layers, different texture of our emotion or feelings or whatever.
Mm,
And so, yeah, wholeness, and I guess, well, that's what embodiment for me, it's like inhabiting your true self, and all of it, right? All of the
mhm.
darkness, quote unquote, negative, scary parts of you, but also all of the parts that are amazing, and they're so easy to feel, right? So, yeah, beautiful.
Well, and I'm sure that you experience with your clients as well that sometimes it really is true that it's the darker or the shadow parts, or what we consider negative culturally, that we have the hardest time embodying. But so often I find people also have a hard time being like, yeah, you know what I'm really good at? You know what
Mm,
I'm really happy about? You know what I did really well recently? You know where I excel? This is actually how what I want to celebrate right now.
right.
And I find that people have an equally challenging time sometimes really leaning into that realm of wholeness as well.
And it also goes, I mean, it goes hand in hand, and obviously, many people have talked about this, and in my experience, in my personal experience, but also in my work with clients, it's like your level of what you talk about embodying that. How shall we call it? The brilliance of who you are, right? Like really
Mm,
embodying that genius within you and showing up and expressing yourself. That level, your capacity to embody that to the in the to the fullest,
mm,
is directly proportional to your level or capacity to embody the opposite side of that, the
mm,
darkness, the fear. And so, how I explain it always to my clients is, um, yeah, you're not able to embody that fullest high, right?
mm,
Because you I mean, it's all interrelated, obviously, because you don't have the
mhm,
capacity to. embody the darkest parts of you. So the more capacity we develop for it,
Mhm.
the more you're okay with holding more. And that's
Mhm.
what depth could go into either way. And I think most
Yeah.
people, like, they struggle with numbness. So like if you can't feel the fear or the negativity or whatever, like it's obvious to me that you won't be able to feel your full expression if you go, like, let's say, spiraling upwards or into that fullest.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah.
Yeah. Mm. Well, I'm glad we're on the same page in terms of that.
Mhm.
Happy to
Mhm.
hear and start this conversation there. So there are quite a few threads that I want to pull on today, and our conversations are quite fluid. But I have a few points that I really wanted to talk to you about. I'm just thinking, like, where shall we start? Because let me just throw out at you the points that I want to discuss, and maybe
Mhm.
you can help me with, like, oh, that's juicy, let's go there. So there's a few points that I want to talk to you about. The first one is obviously polarity, right? Because you have
Mhm.
an article, I think, that you've written recently about polarity beyond polarity, and where
Mhm.
people, like, try to fit everything into this masculine and feminine. And I deal with that too in my program as well. It's like, hey, Anna, I was just thinking, is this feminine or is this masculine? And I'm like,
Mhm.
why don't we just get out of our heads right now, or most of
Mhm.
the time actually, and not, like, try to always talk and think about it, because we're here to do embodiment. So let's actually feel into the body and stuff like that. So
I
that's
just I
one
just
thread.
had that whole breath,
Yeah.
when you were like, "'Cause we're actually here to do embodiment." Like, "Oh, right. Yeah."
Well, actually, let's start with that. I think this subject is quite
Mhm.
potent, and my work is around polarity. I know your journey with well, yeah, I think you were teaching with John before, but maybe now not, and I'm just not
Mhm.
sure where you are with all of that. But let's talk about the polarity beyond polarity, and this whole idea of, especially, I read that you mentioned feminine and masculine leadership.
Mhm.
And you said that, instead of, like, talking about what is feminine leadership, what is masculine leadership, let's actually talk about what leadership is in general. Right,
Mhm.
which I thought was interesting, because for me, I actually quite resonate with this idea of feminine masculine leadership. And I think it's not from the sense of, like, okay, what is leadership from a feminine energy perspective, but actually what is leadership for women.
Mm. But this
Because
is so
it's different.
important
Yeah.
because I also wrote a piece where I said female leadership is not the same as feminine leadership.
Mm.
And the world needs both.
Okay, well, let's
So
dissect that.
we're actually at a time, I would say, in this world where we have both been, weighted towards the side, like overemphasized masculine leadership and overemphasized male leadership.
Right.
However, we see leadership in the world that is female and masculine.
Right, but not feminine. Yes.
And we
Yeah.
see some form, you can tease out pieces where we see male leadership that holds more of the feminine.
Mhm.
And so I really would say that I really believe the world needs both. The truth is we do need, I love, do you know Abby Wambach? Is it Wambach or Wambach? I'm not sure. But she was a soccer star and she wrote a book
Hmm.
called Wolfpack.
No, I haven't heard
I don't
about
know if
that.
I have it right here. It's a
Hmm.
tiny little book. It's like a 3-hour read or something. It's super tiny, and she goes in to do a leadership presentation at a company, and they ask her this question basically, which is something to the effect of like, "Oh, but this is really, really all great, Abby, and we just want to check that the men can also learn from what you're teaching." And she's like, "That's such a great question, and I'm sure you've asked that of every male leadership, consultant that you've hired in the last 10 years as well, whether the women can learn from them." And you're like, "Oh, of course they didn't. Of course they didn't."
Right.
Right. So you brought this perspective of what is the leadership that women need? What is female leadership? And then also what is feminine leadership and what is the feminine? So to me, this is what's so interesting is like teasing out those specifics.
Mhm. So, okay, I get what you mean, and I 100% agree with you. If a woman is let's say female leadership, meaning like a woman
Yeah.
is a leader, it
Yeah.
doesn't mean that this is not most women who are actually leaders at the moment are a leader. And what do we mean by leaders? It could be, leading
Yeah.
companies, countries,
In the politics.
families,
Yeah. Yeah.
everything where you're leading something. Most of it is they're leading in a masculine way,
Yeah.
right? Uh, but it's really interesting when we talk about feminine leadership. Well, I guess first we would need to define, before we
Yeah.
go deeper, what is masculine leadership and what. So how would you define that, masculine leadership versus feminine leadership,
I
not
mean,
gender related?
yeah, again, it's a little tricky because I think like we could probably define it for a week. We could talk nonstop, and
Right.
because, and this is one of the other things that I can't remember. I wrote a piece recently where I specifically spoke to that unhealthy masculine, and often, especially in the realm of leadership, what I see this in the culture at large, but I'll just say to women, what I see is that women have been within structures that are mostly masculine led, masculine, and that's what's asked. And then a largely unhealthy masculine structures, not
Mm.
entirely, but then there's this rejection where we go like, I don't want to do anything masculine ever again, because what they've been part of, corporate culture,
Mhm.
very rigid, very time
Mhm.
based, very, like integrity in a certain way, very hard, very driving, very ambitious, like there's a certain, or cutthroat. And then we just sort of say like, that's the masculine. I would say that's lazy. I would say a lot of those things are more unhealthy, immature, or, people love the term toxic, right? They're
Right. So
sort of
masculine isn't toxic. The
no.
unhealthy masculine is toxic.
Well, and what I see, I mean,
Yeah.
I'm sure you see this with your clients too, is that there really is this beautiful space where, oh my God, I can relax, or I can be in flow, or I can feel my body or my emotions. But this is my experience anyway, is when women then reject all structure,
Mhm.
all accountability, all goals, then their lives also fall. But they're like, then why isn't my business working? I'm like, oh, because
Yeah.
any actual beautiful piece of creation is a weave, is a unique and beautiful weave between masculine and feminine.
Yeah. So,
I, yeah,
mhm.
I
Yeah.
lead from both my feminine and my masculine. My, and it's just, it has to be.
Right.
I,
So, but okay, here's where
yeah,
we get to the juicy
yeah.
part of it. Do you feel, and this is where we get into this whole polarity conversation. When you say I lead from a masculine and feminine, like I run a business as well, and obviously, like it's obvious that I
I
have
mean,
to
you
run
were on
it.
time. I was on time.
Yeah. Well, I
You have
was 1 minute
scheduling
late,
things
but
like,
you
but
know,
it's like,
yeah,
oh, right.
yeah,
Yeah.
for sure, and 100%. But where my actually feminine leadership is the area where I'm going next with my clients. This is like the next level of exploration. And feminine leadership, I can't, how do you say, I can't decouple the feminine from me being a woman, and how, how David Tate talks about essence. And I'm curious
Hmm.
to see whether my sense is that you are a feminine essence woman,
Hmm.
and that most women, first, I guess we need to talk about whether we agree that most women
Hmm.
identify as feminine essence women,
Hmm.
where, and I actually, this whole feminine masculine polarity, in essence, like it can be a bunch of woohoo stuff. And when I talk to John on my podcast, we actually discuss, he's like, well, I actually want to surrender and let go from time to time. Like we don't have to be that rigid. And I understand that, and that's my work with clients. However, I explored these feminine masculine polarities. I went deeper into studying, okay, well, like why? That's not enough for me to just know that, yes, I identify as a feminine essence woman. Yes, I want to feel safe in relationship and be held and relaxed. Like this is my nature, and this is the nature of
Hmm.
most women. If based on what I talk, based on how many women I talk to in my own work, but I'm
Hmm.
like, but why, right? Like it's not enough for me to just accept that as a status quo, even if my
Yes.
experience is that. But why? So I went actually and researched stuff like it and read a bunch of books and just explored and talked to different people about, evolutionary psychology and
Yeah.
biology and where does this come from, and this is where I found evidence that this is indeed true, and animal kingdom and stuff like that, and I pull on all of that in my work with women. I explain that. So to me, that's how it all makes sense. And then, so when we talk
Mhm.
about feminine leadership, like right now, I have a business, right? And I have two very small children. One is
Mhm.
still breastfed. The other one is 3.5 years old. I also
Mhm.
am now working with my cycle. So
Mhm.
I actually want to share with you. This is the first time I'm sharing it with everyone, but I think
Mhm.
you are probably the perfect person to share this with because I just came up with it. And so for me, feminine leadership is like, how do I lead as
Mm.
a woman according to my according to
Mm.
my feminine essence nature that still
Mm.
respects the masculine structure. Like, I'm very
Mm.
clear about that. I got a business to run that has to be scalable, and like there's traffic and funnels and stuff like that, but I also want to run it and lead
Mhm.
according to my feminine essence, feminine nature. And for me, the formula that
Mm.
I just came up with like 2 weeks ago, and I still explore, is number one, according to my cycle. I don't know
Mhm.
what's your kind of relation to that, because really after my second child, so my cycle came back like 2 months ago.
Mhm.
And I really like, I'm studying this work of like Red School and the cycles and the inner seasons. And after my second child, uh, my cycle is like a textbook, 4 seasons. I'm in my summer, I'm in my, fall, winter, and I'm like, whoa, this is it. This is it. I'm feeling it. I'm living it. Right. So the
Mhm.
cycle, according to and honestly, I think this is the formula for like feminine leadership. It's like, live according to your cycle and lead according to your cycle. The second one is actually sexuality, and that idea of like the multi-orgasmic woman. And it's very
Mhm.
so the the seasons is, for me personally, obviously what men don't experience and will never experience, because it's biology, and that's what it's true nature for a woman. The second thing is actually the same thing, like being I know you can be a multi-orgasmic man, but the way a
Mhm.
woman experiences orgasm is super different, right? Like, and so
Mhm.
for me, and I had this moment actually of an orgasm. I was like, oh my god. And I actually did orgasm to a goal, to a financial goal that I had.
Mm.
And it
Mhm.
was so so for me, money and, like, let's say, wealth and richness is so clear now that it's directly related to my sex and to my ability to be that multi-orgasmic woman, because then I know I'm magnetic and I actually don't have to do, like, the masculine structure is there, but I don't have to
Mhm.
do much. I can do less. And then
Mhm.
everything is weaved. So these two things, and everything
Mhm.
is weaved through embodiment
Mhm.
practices, and all of that together creates so much magnetism. And this
Mhm.
is my personal, that I still need to
Mhm.
explore, formula for like feminine leadership for a woman. I guess for a
Mhm.
woman is like that subtitle that needs to be, because obviously there's feminine leadership for a man, but a man doesn't experience cycle, and it also doesn't experience being orgasmic in a female body. How does that all sit with you?
Well, I mean, I love it, and what I love is that there is a truth. I was just talking to one of my dear friends about this also, where and we were kind of talking about being moving into menopause, right? Perimenopause and
Mhm.
menopause, and the pieces around just recognizing that hormones are actually real, right? There's so much in this world we want to be like, we can,
Right.
evolve beyond that, or I'm not bound by this, or
Mhm.
we can sort of, and it's like, oh, actually, so hormones are real, and that doesn't mean that we're trapped by things. So I do really appreciate what you're saying, which is, what it is to be born into a female body, the actual hormones that are different in a female body, the way that our life is. And it is also true that there are people who have female bodies whose lives are marked by very different blood cycles, who either don't have a typical cycle, or, I mean, there's all kinds of reasons for these things.
Mhm.
So, but that there is a different way of being marked by blood cycle. And Clarissa Pinkola Estes also talks about this, that these blood cycles are all portals to wisdom.
Mhm.
And often menopause is not so much honored in that, but it's like it is one of the blood rights, right? So,
Right.
and pregnancy and birth, same. So there's that piece. And then there's this piece that where I would ultimately, I think a framework can be really useful. And then ultimately, especially when we go embodied with it, what we say is like, okay, so you go track your cycle. And maybe you track specific, you just day to day and whatever that means. Every day you write your mood. You have a sense of what day it is in your cycle. I have like a 27-day cycle. It's been that way since I was like 19. Some people, I have a friend who has this like really short cycle. She bleeds really frequently. Somebody else has a long one. Some, other people, it fluctuates a lot. So track your cycle in your actual body, and then how does that correlate to your mood, to your emotions, to your sensitivity, to your creativity, to your production, to your receiving. And this is the place where I would say, a male-bodied person doesn't have a blood cycle, but they could like they're still impacted by the moon. I mean, we all live on planet Earth, and the moon impacts, we're all 70% water. And I do actually, there are times where my partner will do something. I'm like, I think he's like in his male PMS. Like, I don't know quite what his cycle is, but there are these cycles. And he is impacted by the seasons where we live. Absolutely. Like, I watch it now, over 10 years of knowing him. And so there's a place where I think it's important to get specific in terms of woman or female or menstruation or your hormones or your body. And there's a place where I also think when we turn it into embodiment, what's really important is that we get very in touch with our actual bodies. And men can do that and women can do that. And the same with sex and orgasm, right? So I love working with men. And one of the things that I find that I think that women are often surprised by is how unconfident actually men feel in relation to their sexuality. Like, we're so often sort of taught that they maybe took something from us when we were young, or there's this, and how many men actually had first sexual experiences that may not qualify as abuse, but they were like, I don't know that I actually wanted to have sex, but there I was, and I didn't know what to do, and I was supposed to say yes, and I'm supposed to want it, and so like, how many men are actually deeply disconnected from what is a direct experience of pleasure, which is part of what I hear you speaking to with multi orgasm, or your direct connection to your own orgasm, is what is it to be in direct contact with my own pleasure? And how is that related to how I run my business, how I move through the world, my creativity, my wealth? So I sort of go both and. I think I hold spaces, like the collective is only for women. I hold spaces that are only for women. But I also, the more that I work with men, the more that I realize there are places where it's not about saying we're all the same and let's just neutralize everything, but the practice itself of paying attention to what is actually happening and living and leading from that place, that does actually cross, sex and gender and sexual orientation lines.
Yeah. I can totally see your perspective, and as you talk, I'm thinking about, I think, the nature of your work. Like, we started with embodied wholeness, and for you, it's like embodied wholeness, no matter what body you are or gender you are, and because you do work with men and women at the same time, it's like, well, so I feel like you do recognize obviously these differences and the polarities. You're very aware of it, but for you, that's not like the center of it. You're like, okay, great, let's recognize it, but beyond that polarity is actually, yes, as a woman, you have your cycle and you are multi-orgasmic. That's very different to men. But, right, as a man, you also have a cycle as well, whether it's like the sun cycle, the seasons, whatever, and you're also orgasmic. And what does pleasure mean for you? And so both of us can relate to these, like go into our own bodies, discovering and maybe explore those cycles, the orgasms, the pleasure, and then bring that into your life and into your leadership. So, yeah.
Well, and to me, this speaks to the conversation we were having, which is that it would be valuable for the world if there was more male-bodied feminine leadership as well. It would be it's valuable for the world for there to be more feminine leadership in general. And so part of this framework that you're exploring, I really do believe that I believe what you're talking about is incredibly powerful for women. And I think that it would actually serve for men to engage it in their own way as well. And they would probably bring a more feminine influenced leadership, and the world would benefit.
So what is feminine? So what is feminine leadership in your, like, how would you describe that? Because the masculine,
Yeah.
I think we understand because we're so familiar with it. Like it's the goals, the structure. What is
Yeah.
the container here? What are we doing? Where are we going? Right. So how would you describe feminine leadership?
I think that's such a great question. First of all, I do want to just tell a brief story about essence because
Mm,
I have worked with David Data, but I also studied with his former partner, Sophia Diaz, who
mm,
teaches embodiment. And I studied with her quite extensively for one period of time. And so she knew me over time. And I was at a retreat with her, and she was having the room. It was a mixed gender room, and she asked the room to separate into people who identified as feminine essence and people who identified as masculine essence. And I was started crying. I was like, I don't know, am I masculine or am I feminine? And she takes my arm and she drags me up to the front of the room in front of everybody. I'm still like, ah. And she points to me and she's talking to everybody else. And she says, only someone with a feminine essence would still be confused after all this time. Like, she's like, I've been working with this woman for years. And I was like, oh, so feminine leadership. I do think that feminine leadership is more collaborative versus like competitive or solo. Right, there's the solo identification, and there's the
mm-hmm.
collaborative identification. And partly that happens because at this place there is that sense of being of directly feeling interconnectedness, which again I don't think is limited to women or females, but it is that part of us that is more tapped into
Right.
the interconnectedness. It's actually one of the reasons that I think that a lot of self-care is actually harming women, because a lot of it takes us out of, it's like, buy more of this and create more trash like this, and we can feel that that's actually killing life on earth. And so it's killing us to try to self-care. um, so it's kind of another rabbit hole, but
Mm,
that actually direct connection with life, I would say our direct connection with life is a feminine experience and a feminine expression. So feminine leadership, in one sense, one of the ways that looks is taking more into consideration. But at the deepest level, it comes from like, wait, I'm feeling what actually serves life here. And so I'm going to care how this impacts employees, or I'm going to care how this impacts the environment, or I'm going to care, right? It can't be siloed,
right.
which is actually, and that's part of what I talked about in that article that you referenced, which is sort of, I think I was being cheeky and I said polarities are greater than polarity, because the very desire to silo things into compartments is a masculine tendency. And so when we as women do that about being only feminine, we are actually embodying the masculine.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really interesting. So when you're talking about feminine leadership,
Yeah.
as you're talking through it, what I hear is that you almost, well, you and me, and you almost can't help yourself but get back to the sense of we, women. Do you know what I
Yes.
mean? So that's why for me,
Yes.
feminine leadership cannot be, I understand that obviously 100% men, there should be
Hmm.
more feminine leadership in men. I have these discussions with
Hmm.
my husband. I'm like,
Hmm.
have you thought about all of these things? He's like,
Hmm.
what?
Yeah.
Like, it's not even in his realm to think about how this thing will affect everything else, but it
Yes.
is in mine. And so that's why for me, feminine leadership cannot be decoupled from me being a woman, because
Yes.
being a woman, I have the engines in my body and in my system, and I'm wired to lead. Whether I do not lead in a feminine, it doesn't mean that I will naturally lead that. Although if I have the tools and the
Yeah.
permission, and I know that that's accepted and valued, I will. Like what I see in a lot of my clients that I teach, they obviously come into my program to find a masculine man. That's what they want. And they're
Mhm.
very successful and driven and ambitious, like, doctors and lawyers and women at the top, let's say. And what
Mhm.
happens is they go through this process of embodiment, of rediscovering themselves as a woman, because that's part of how you attract a masculine man who's your equal and stuff. By the end of it, they're like, oh my God, I don't want to do what I've been doing the last 20 years. I always thought that being a lawyer and the partner at a firm, one client comes to mind, is what I wanted. That was my goal. Gone through this
Yes.
process and doing embodiment, I'm like, no, no,
Yes.
that's not me. I don't want to play by those rules. So who the fuck am I now? A lot of
Yes.
women, as they go through this process and the world shifts, and they're like, oh my God, like how they go completely to what you were talking about, so they go from like masculine, in their
Yes.
work, and they're like go through this process like shit, like who they go towards the other end of the spectrum. They're like, I just want to do flower crowns all day for a while because
Yes.
I don't know who I am anymore. And part of my work here is to also, and this is what I'm like, how do we bring you back into where you live your life as a feminine essence woman, and you explore what
Yes.
is feminine leadership is for you, but you still have that structure, but then you
Yes.
predominantly live according to your nature. That's why for me, feminine leadership and women are like this. More women
Yes.
will uh, um, will get more satisfied and live in their full potential if they lead from that feminine.
I think that's fair. I think I have a little bit less just in my own personality makeup. I'm not really a why person. I'm a like, does it work person?
Mm.
Um, and so
Hmm.
I mean, to me, what you're saying is true, just in the sense of, yeah, if more women are able to do what you're talking about, they will be happier, they will be more fulfilled, the world will be better. Great, let's just do it. Um, I have less of an impulse towards then figuring out like, well, are they feminine essence or what percentage? I mean, John and I actually had an argument about this one time because he used to throw out numbers when we would be teaching publicly. He'd be like, well, 60% of women are, and I was like, John, I need you to stop saying that because we don't know. And I'm not saying you're wrong, but we don't know. And what I have had conversations, because I do have colleagues who are much more engaged in like the LGBTQ community,
Mm-hmm.
people who are engaging in non-heteronormative relationships. And I just realized that the people that they come in contact with are very different than the people I come in contact. So my
Right.
sample size is slanted. And again, I'm not here to make a big case that it's totally the other way around or that it doesn't matter. I'm just like, we don't know. We don't know. So I don't want to make any claims about something that I don't know. And so what's interesting to me is what works. And for me, so much of what works in relation to what you're talking about is that there is this bridge that you're talking about between right, I just want to make flower crowns, which is basically like that's the only way I know how to do um, what feels good. And what the work that you're doing, what I hear is that you're actually creating a paradigm where it's like, hey, you could have a job and actually do it in a way that feels aligned with who you are.
Mm-hmm.
And let's build that bridge, let's walk it. And so the way that I often do that with women is through devotion. And so I'll often say commitments should serve devotion. And if we can get in touch with what you are truly devoted to, then we can. I mean, as a mother, you get this, right? It's like, I don't always want to cook for my kids. I am like, I rarely want to cook for my kids, actually. It is so rare, but I do it a lot. And I don't do it. I mean, I do. Occasionally, I do it with drudgery or obligation. But I would
Right.
say 90% of the time when I actually cook for my kids, I find some joy because what I'm tapped into is my devotion. And it's deeper than like, well, I did my commitment to feed my children or to be a good mom. I'm like, oh, I'm actually devoted. Like, I love these human beings.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm devoted to them having a certain experience of the world. And I'm devoted to showing them what it is to be in. Like, we don't go out for pizza every night, not just because it's not healthy for us, but actually because I'm really devoted to them experiencing direct connection with food or what it is to live in right alignment with consumer culture in the United States, or right. There's like these deeper devotions when I tap in. And this is the same with my business, which again, every once in a while, I'm like, all right, grin and bear it and write an email. But most of the time I can actually tap into something that I care deeply about, that I would bow down to, right? Like I'm actually a disciple, or I am a devotee of, that is underneath like why the fuck I would ever write sales copy. And then I think that is that place where it's like, oh, this isn't a justification to now fit myself into some masculine structure. This is actually the place where I can find, it's, I think the way you talk about it, the way that I would then use this is like the right rhythm. What is actually my correct rhythm? And it's connected to me and my cycles and my children and the land I live on and the seasons and my partner's job. And like, there's an actual right rhythm in there. And then I weave devotion into that. And then I create commitments from that place. And we can always change our commitments, right? If we're like, this is not working. But it's very different than that sort of what I would then call the immature feminine, which is like, I just only want to do what feels good in every moment.
Yeah, well, so I understand what you're saying in terms of like, yeah, I run a business too, and I need to write the emails, I need to create content. So there's a lot of stuff in business that, well, like you have a job, business, whatever you're doing in the world, there's certain things that have to be done. And so how you do that in a way that's like aligned is through that devotion, as in like, I know, yeah, I'm not really in the mood to write the sales copy or create that content, but I do it because this is my commitment to my devotion to the higher purpose, to what I'm in service with, which is my calling or my message or the world. Like, why am I doing this, right? Like, I know the same thing with the
Yeah.
kids. I know I love them. I feel a deeper sense of connection here, and so that's why I'm doing this. So when we write the copy or the emails, or we have to do those things at our job, we know why we're doing them. Well, ideally, right? That's the devotion there. And so yeah, it's really interesting. I actually have a question about one of my team members sent me this post that you wrote, so I want to get back actually to first. Let's talk about this because it's related to the business and what we're exactly talking. But then I want to circle back to what you mentioned, that we don't know. So, when John says 60% of women, we don't know. I actually have, not a theory, but I'd love to share with you my perspective because I think we do know. And that's all related to like evolutionary psychology and stuff. But anyways, that's next. So now I want to ask you something that I found really interesting. You wrote a post recently, I guess this year, about entrepreneurship burnout. And you said, and I can find this in the here. You said that if I can read some of it,
Absolutely.
you
I mean, it's
said,
public, so.
yeah, right. You're writing, I'm one of the few entrepreneurs I know who has never hit burnout, which is like, whoa. When I read that, especially being a woman, and why I say especially being a woman because of all these things that I mentioned. And you say, I think this is because way back when, before I was successful, I put spaciousness and devotion, what we're talking about now, front and center. And I never let spaciousness or devotion be anywhere but front and center ever. I was always willing to give up money, clients, opportunity, fame, or success for the depth of spaciousness and devotion in my life that I desire. In this way, I've created a successful business while also being a mom of two. How old are your kids now, by
My
the way?
son is turning 13 tomorrow, and my daughter's 9.5. Yeah.
Ah, beautiful. So
Yeah.
sorry, there was something I was curious about. So in this way, I've created a successful business while also being a mom of two, for years a solo mama, caring for an elder in my family, tending to intimate relationships, growing a garden. I have it all because I never tried to do it all. My spirit wouldn't allow me to override what was most important to me for what anyone else said or thought was most important. And for that, I will always be deeply, humbly grateful. Wow. Like, to me, that is so beautiful. And I think that every single female entrepreneur wants to have. But
Mhm.
I always have the but, right? And when I read
Mhm.
that post, I was like, okay, I think we need to talk about successful or have it
Mhm.
all, because I I really, well, I want to ask you this question because I really think that I think I'm not ambition, because if I say, oh, Kendra, maybe you're not ambitious enough, I don't want to say that at all.
Mhm.
But I think
Mhm.
that it's like, what are we talking about here? Are we talking about, you know, like, what does success mean? Because success can mean different things to different people. And if I'm talking about a certain, and I'll tell you my experience with it, say,
Mhm.
I've been doing the program for more than 2 years now. And in the first year of launching the program, we've grown 10x. I'm talking
Mhm.
revenue, clients, everything.
Mhm.
And my husband is my business partner, but I'm obviously the face of the business. And so to grow 10x, to get to that level, I've hit burnout
Mhm.
multiple times,
Mhm.
because I think that the goal was so crazy, and we literally achieved some numbers that I never dreamed of. But that
Mhm.
required me to
Mhm.
overextend myself to the limit, where I literally, some
Mhm.
days, I had 6 discovery calls scheduled, and I just couldn't
Mhm.
anymore, and I collapsed on the
Yeah.
floor. So,
Yeah.
do you know what I mean? And I'm like,
Well,
yeah.
I don't know if I don't know if this is exactly responding to where you're looking, but to me, this actually points to this other um, sort of taboo topic in both the entrepreneurial and the self-help and this realm, like the coaching realm,
Right.
which is that there are limitations. And so it's more, I mean, everyone wants to run the limitless success retreat. No one wants to run
Right.
like the limited sex retreat, um, but it's more common, I guess, or more, it also feels more acceptable somehow to actually kind of have those impossible goals and to go through cycles of burnout and to find like, and this is how I got out of burnout. And those are the stories we're here. And it's actually one of the reasons I wrote this post, because I was quite poor for years. And I grew up really poor. My mom was a single mom. We were on food stamps, which is like a government assistance in the United States. And we lived in a trailer that was in the wilderness. Like, we had very little. And I think that partly did, I mean, I could have revolted against that and been like, I will never live like that again. But I think part of what I saw was that we lived also a very abundant life in another way, and we were very connected to the cycles like you're talking about. I mean, we didn't have electricity. It got dark at night and it was light in the day, and we saw so much beauty, and we heard owls, and we had this like really beautiful life. My mom she always created beauty in our space, even when we had so little money. And so I had that as kind of this guiding light, and that it was less like, oh, I'm going to martyr myself to be a good mom and make less money. There was something about like, I have a devotion to a kind of simple life that will not allow me to, just run roughshod over that, like rushing around and doing this and getting more childcare for you so that I could maybe make more money over here. I was like, actually, I'm gonna stay on this path that might make me money, might not make. I don't know for sure. I didn't know for years. Like, am I gonna
Hmm.
make a lot of money with this or not? But I couldn't override for that. And
Hmm.
what I do see is that I think there is something about, if we're not afraid of leaning into things, but we're also not afraid of doing without, and we do stay committed to like what we are devoted to and to bringing what we're here to bring, that I sometimes it's a slower process. Like, I didn't 10x in 2 years, but I make plenty of money, and I'm happy. And what I would like to give permission for anyone who's listening is that both are valid options. But I want people to know that both are actually options.
Yeah. 100%. Like, you know what hit me when you said childcare? I'll tell you my situation at the moment. So I have a 9-month-old and I have a 3.5-year-old. And I've actually have had
Oh, they're so
conversation.
tiny.
I
Yeah.
know. It's just so like, especially the second child is like just, it's like, this is what I'm here for. Nothing else matters,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And at the same time, and
Yeah.
this is the conversation that I've actually been having with a lot of women, especially women who have children, have the business. That's why I'm like trying to figure it out. And I do resonate
Yeah.
when you say, you know, right now, because I'm obviously an entrepreneur, I'm in a lot of like entrepreneurship circles, and this idea of limitless, right? It's like
Yes.
you can have the success that you dream of. Everything is
Mm-hmm.
possible. So it's kind of that duality of wanting that and knowing that it is
Mm-hmm.
actually possible, but at the same
Yes.
time, yeah, like it's really interesting. I want to say accepting the limitations, but also not. Like,
It really is. It's both.
yeah, it's that.
So it's not just like, I guess this is all that's possible, right? That's a certain, meh. But it's like, I mean, what I really think it's incredible for you to be honest about, like, actually, I did this, and this is what it cost me. And it doesn't necessarily have to cost that every time, but there is this place where we go, like, yeah, the truth is, if I do this, it might have this impact, or how, and maybe can I futz with it a little bit and see if it has slightly different impact? But there is a chance that it's like, yeah, actually, if I want to do this, it might have this cost. Or if I choose to not do this, it might have this cost.
Yeah.
And in that way, there actually is a limitation, right? Like we're
Well,
on planet
especially
Earth.
when
We have,
we talk
like,
about women, because I can now see based on what you're talking that you work with men and women. You have colleagues in like LGBT communities, and probably there's some non-binary conversations there and stuff like that. So I can really appreciate the perspective and kind of the depth that you're exposed to that I am not. And that's
mm-hmm.
why I guess my thing is like very, very specific in terms of how
Yeah.
does feminine leadership look for women who want to work with their bodies, because it's really interesting when we talk about women, we can look at
Mm.
biologically a woman's limitation, and I do quotes here,
Yes.
is her ability to have, well, her ability, the fact that we are the only ones to have children. And so
Yeah, absolutely.
children can be looked upon, really interesting, like the parallel here with entrepreneurship, and it ties into what children can be looked upon a limitation, and in a way like totally is, in terms of like, even, you know, right now I had this deep desire a few months ago. I'm like, third child, I'm like, oh my god, like there's nothing else. And you know, like I think once you have
Mm-hmm.
one or two, you're like, I just need to keep going, because it's like so programmed in me to just have
Mm.
children as a woman. And but then when I like looked into, when I really thought about what is it going to take, like I'm
Mm-hmm.
barely surviving with two at the moment because they're so small. What is it going to
Mm-hmm.
take? And I had to kind of do this negotiation with myself, what you're talking about. Like, first, I had to do this negotiation of, okay, so my 9-month-old, as I'm talking to you, she's in childcare, and my 3.5-year-old is in childcare, right? And I've had plenty of conversations with women about this when they're like, Anna, what's the rush? Like your kids, I'm
Mm-hmm.
so conscious about hearing women who have older children, or men or whoever, they the biggest regret for those people who are like successful, and they did quote unquote sacrifice that part of, you know, when the children were little, they say the biggest regret
Yeah.
is that I did not spend enough time with my kids, and I wasn't there when they were younger or whatever. Like, it's childcare, and we're outsourcing for what? For career, for money, like for these goals. And this is where you're
Mm-hmm.
talking about. I love that story, because I also come from the poorest country in Europe, Moldova, you know, where we had
Mm-hmm.
nothing.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it's not that we had nothing, but similar to what you have experienced, obviously very different. But and so
Mm-hmm.
if they're asking like, what's the rush, you know, like, it's like, what's the country?
Yeah.
And I sit there and I'm like, what's the rush? Can't I just like enjoy motherhood and pace it like to what you're talking about? And then at the same time, in a year's time, my husband and I have moved towns, and what we've done, which is quite I really realize and understand that what we've done is quite incredible, and there's a few factors that contributed to it. But we moved to the beach. We now live, 5 minutes from walking to the beach. We live in this beautiful house, and
Mhm.
and we can have the experience. Nothing is perfect, but I can live the life that I want to live. Like, this is my genuine true expression and my desire. And as a woman, I realized, like, that's why I'm like, third child, probably not, because, and I actually voiced this out to a
Mhm.
friend. I said, I've got dreams and I've got goals, and I'm
Mhm.
33 right now, and I don't want to start on those dreams at 40. Like, I want to be
Mhm.
40. I've got two kids. I want to be 40, and like, I want to be, it's not that I want to be on top, but like, I want it, like. And that's why when we're talking about ambition,
Mhm.
people
Mhm.
tell me, and I really really understand that this might be my disposition as my nature, because from when I was
Mhm.
really little, I feel like this is a therapy session with Kendra Cunov. Like, on my podcast, please listen to my story. But I
Yeah.
but I'm very conscious of, like, since I was little, I was extremely, like, people tell me I'm the most ambitious person they know around.
See, this is what's so great. Like, there's at least three different threads here I want to
Yeah.
pull on, but I do want to touch on that and say this is why it's not about toss out essence or
Hmm.
toss out masculine, feminine, but let's just say that there are other layers that are also important.
Right.
So you can be a feminine essence woman who's very ambitious. And that's just, it's an added layer. And that's going to be different than a feminine essence woman who's not ambitious, right? And then we just have to, without going into all of the different layers that we could add, we go like, oh, there's probably infinite layers that can be added into there. And one of my first, there there've been a few sort of like, I don't know, pushing the edges little things that I've written about polarity and masculine and feminine. And one of them was actually seeing a Facebook post that somebody wrote and said, ambition is
Oh,
feminine.
yeah.
I was like, no, it's not. Like, let's not try. Actually, women are allowed to be masculine. We don't have to name your ambition as feminine so that it's okay for you to be ambitious. You can be a feminine woman and you can be ambitious. And both of the, so that's where we widen, sort of that's the wholeness piece too. Like, let's widen out here, and that they don't have to be at odds. And I want to say, and this is actually, I think even in that realm of like your kids are at childcare. I mean, my kids went to childcare too. And it was just more like sometimes you see that if people start to balance it out, right, there might be more childcare, or there's sort of, like, there was a limit to what I wanted to do there. But there at the same time, like when my daughter was 1.5 is when I started, like, I worked for a coach named Rich Litvin, and I started flying to LA. And then through Rich is how I met John. I started working with
Hmm.
John. And basically at that point, like, I started flying to LA and being gone for, 7 days at a time, maybe 3, 4 times a year.
Hmm.
And so, most of my life was in a very spacious rhythm. And then there would be these times. I mean, specifically, I remember doing one of my intensives with Rich, and I just, like, I did everything. And at the end, I was literally standing across from someone and I saw double. And I was like, I will never do that again. It wasn't like, oh my God, I shouldn't have done that. I just thought, like, but I have no regrets because now I know what I want to do next time and what I don't. And I just very consciously threw myself into everything at that. And that even itself is this process of how do we do co-parenting? How do we be a woman who's a mother and leave? And the first time that I left my children to go to one of these intensives, I had probably like a 3-page document that I sent to my children have two fathers. I sent to both of the fathers. I sent to my grandmother. I sent to my dad and my stepmother. I sent to our friend. I sent to our babysitter. I sent to the preschool teacher, because everybody was involved and they all needed each other's phone numbers, and they
For
needed to know
7
what was the
days.
weekend schedule and what was the weekday schedule, and like who was going to be where, when, and all these things. And the second time that I left, I told the fathers of my children, this is when I'm going to be gone. Let me know if you need anything. Right. So again, it's sort of this, like, how do we flow and how do we weave these different parts? It wasn't that I totally put off my career for 5 years. But I think that there's we often think that it's all or nothing. There's even a polarized imagination, right? Either I can go for it or I can have this spacious life. Either I, can be ambitious or I can be there for my children. Either or. And it's like, I'm curious if that can weave together.
Yeah.
And see where we get creative.
Yeah. And I think most of us who are mothers and have careers or businesses, we're trying to do that. And we're trying to see where's that line and where does it work for me, right? Like, because obviously for me, my children are like number one priority. I get a call right now, child is sick, drop everything. Kendra, I got to go, right? So, and yeah, and it's going to look very different for different women, and depending on their level of ambition or whatever. So yeah, this is why this whole feminine masculine polarity discussion is so interesting. And I feel like you will never get to a conclusion. Like you said, for 7 days we can talk about, well, what does this mean, and stuff like that. The way I kind of made it clear and in my head is, that's what I tell all my clients when they get into these. Like, I'm like, okay, first level is you are a human and you have a personality, and there's all these things and the values and da-da-da. How I look at feminine masculine polarity, and I think this is why it actually works, is where I don't try to categorize everything as feminine and masculine. Sometimes women come with questions, well, I'm thinking about this and I'm dressing, is this feminine or masculine? So what I do, I'm like, well, we could sit here and talk about, categorize everything as feminine or masculine. Let's just focus on what I do, for example, is just feminine, masculine in relationships. And even that has a few layers, like continuously, right? Like, let's focus on that. And then let's do embodiment and yeah. Anyway, so we can go, yeah.
Well, and what's so important about that too, when you become, this is where our desire actually lives, is in our body. I mean, we can think it, and that's fine. Our brain is also part of our body, but the origination, how do we even know what we want? And so it is one of the reasons, and I think that feminine and masculine, especially if we are talking about heterosexual women who want to be with men, it's a very, very, very valuable tool. And the place that we get tripped up is if we think it's the only tool in the toolbox. And I'll just be a little blunt, which is that we can get lazy. So sometimes, I mean, I have women come and say, I want a masculine man, or I just need him to be more masculine. I have men who are like, well, I just wish she would be more in her feminine. And I think it's lazy. I'm like, there is something you actually want. There are a million ways that she could be more in her feminine that actually are not the thing you want. And there is something that you want. And so that place where we actually go into ourselves and go, what is it that I want in relationship? What do I want with a partner? What do I want sexually? And I don't just mean the acts, but even that sense of like, oh, I want him to look into my eyes and I want to feel like he's looking into my heart. But what we say is, I want you to be more masculine.
Yeah.
And what we mean is, I would like you to just stand more still, and I would like you to breathe deeper into your belly, and I would like you to look as though you could see into the center of my heart. And then we go, oh, that feels so good.
Yeah. So it's really interesting because I don't think I understood it consciously when I created my body of work. But, the process and what I do with women in my program, which is called Claimed. And I love that you work with Rich, because I used to work for Mind Valley for many years, specifically in EverCoach and with Ajit and all of that. So that's really cool. But yeah, getting back to the subject, polarity for me is just like one pillar of the work that we do with women. It's understanding the polarity and how it
Yeah.
works. It's that prism or filter that will look at relationships. That's all that it is for me. But then what I do with clients, and this I think will be helpful for listeners, and I'm curious. I mean, I think essentially we're doing the same thing, but just through different ways, I guess. Well, we do have a common thread, which is embodiment. But then I look at like, okay, let's look at your belief system about men
Mm.
and women and
Mhm.
relationships and your beliefs about yourself. And let's look
Mm.
at how embodiment can actually help you reframe those beliefs,
Mm.
embody everything that you might feel like, for most women, one of their core deep beliefs is like, I'm not worthy of a great man. So it has
Mm.
nothing to do necessarily, it
Mhm.
nothing to do with polarity, right? When you look at it that way. But it's like, okay,
Mhm.
how does that feel? Can I breathe into that? Can I let that land in my body? Can I move with that? Can I welcome that? And
Mm.
what does your body want to believe now? Right?
Mm.
And can I embody that? And so throughout the whole work, what we do is we help women really get out of their heads and into their bodies and feel
Mhm.
again, develop the capacity that we talked about in the beginning. And through that, well, at least in my picture of how everything comes together, they get to know themselves and their essence, and in that way women can relax and
Mm.
surrender. And
Mhm.
like, I don't need to be a workhorse here. Like, I am, and
Mhm.
I am, and that's enough. And then through that, and also learning, obviously, that feminine is like letting go and relaxing, getting more acquainted with that and familiar, and that giving themselves permission to do that. They do attract the polar opposite, which is a man who's like, I can hold space for
Mhm.
this. She allows me, right? She's not thinking, are you my next
Mhm.
husband? And, doing this dating game and texting, what do I say? But she's like, I'm here. And I laugh at your jokes, and I
Mhm.
and I let you lead me into where this needs to go.
Mhm.
So
Mhm.
yeah. So in conclusion, polarity, as you said, is just one tool, very, very valuable tool. But I do agree, yeah,
Mhm.
100%. Like, if I wasn't a feminine embodiment coach, and if my program, for example, my body didn't have that embodiment tool and the beliefs stuff, then this
Mhm.
polarity stuff is like, how do I be more feminine? And all these YouTube videos about, wearing skirts and burning candles, that shit. And yeah, it can help you, but it's like sprinkles on the
Mhm.
surface. Like, it doesn't mean anything about who you are, about what's going on for you, and how to change that.
Well, and it can just add to what you're talking about, is that deeper unworthiness.
Mm,
Oh, maybe if I wear a skirt, I'll be worthy. Maybe if I have the right candle, I'll be worthy. Maybe if I wear the goddess clothes, I'll be worthy. Right? It can be like a layer on
right.
top. And so what you're talking about, right, is going underneath and finding the places where that's true. And then we can express from that place. And that is, I mean, it's simultaneously more attractive and more magnetic. And then also we just enjoy ourselves. Like, then we're there for the experience.
Right.
And it's a much more enjoyable life and dating and relationship and sex and.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, it feels like we can conclude here, Kendra,
Hmm.
unless there is something else that you have that you wanted to express based on everything we talked about.
Mm. I think it's not different than anything we've said. But there's like a context around what we've been talking about that feels important, which is that I actually do believe that this is culture changing, and that we have the capacity. I mean, I also believe that, work at changing culture at the level of systems and governments is important, but there's something that we have available to us at all times, which is, who do I choose to be in the world? How do I move through the world? What am I embodying? What are the choices that I'm making about how I do life around me? And that is actually the level at which culture is created. And in particular, as women, we can often say, well, I have to do this, or the culture says this, or da 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 da. And I think that we actually, most of the people who have the free time to listen to a podcast actually are safe enough and free enough in our lives that we actually have some capacity to be responsible for changing the culture around us, to be more welcoming of feminine expression, or truth, or wholeness, or freedom, or, whatever these things are that we care about. We actually get, and even dating, like you talked about, people will say like, well, the dating is like this, or you can't say that on a first date. And I'm like, actually, you get to say, like, you get to be the one who has that first date, and that actually changes the culture.
Yeah. Beautiful. All right, Kendra. So we're going to finish here. And the last thing is, of course, for women who are listening, where can they find you and know more about your work?
I think the easiest way is, well, there's one of the great things about having a name like Kendra Cunov is that there's not very many of me. So I'm very easy to find on the socials. And also on my webpage at kendracunov.com, there I have a lot of blogs. A lot of them have videos associated with them. Like, there's just a lot of free content. And I think that really gives people a place to go, like, who is this crazy bitch? Or like, oh, that's interesting, I'd like to learn more.
Where does your name come from?
My mom. So Cunov or Kendra?
Both, but I have a sense that the second one is Cunov sounds like Slavic.
It's Eastern European. So I actually have my mother's maiden name.
Okay.
My children also have my mother's maiden name because my mother was not married. My ex-husband took my last name. So anyway, there's like a whole.
So we're from Eastern Europe, because I'm also Eastern European.
My mom said that the farthest back that they could trace on that for the Cunov side was a small town in Germany called Templin.
Okay.
But they think that maybe it was Cunol with an L, when some of the people who actually came to the United States at that time.
Because Cunov is very Slavic, Eastern European. And in fact, if you were there, it would be Cunova for a female. Cunova. Yeah, because Cunov is very like male, because, in Eastern Europe it's like a va of. Yeah. Anyways, okay, cool. And Kendra?
Yeah. My mom found it. She didn't name me for 10 days. And then she took me up onto the roof of the building where I was born and told me my name. But I think she was she found it in a book called like 10,000 Names for a Baby.
Okay. And you were born on a roof of a building?
No, I was born at home. So I was born in the building, but then I wasn't named for 10 days. And at that time she said, well, I'm going to tell Kendra her name first. I mean, she didn't say that obviously, but she didn't tell anybody else. She took me up to the roof of the building, told me my name, and then told everybody else.
Beautiful. All right, Kendra Cunov, very unique name. Thanks so much for being on the podcast, and I look forward to connecting again.
Such a pleasure. Thank you so much.